Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, it's the top of the hour, and welcome to Getting to the Wow in Photography. My name is Darlene Hildebrandt, and I'm going to walk you through hopefully achieving some wow in your photography tonight. This is my second webinar, so I have slight experience from last week. This is my second time go through on this. If this is your first webinar that you've attended, especially using this system, I'd like to give you a little bit of a walkthrough before we get into the content of the webinar, just so you know how to use the system and how to ask a question, because this will be an interactive session as we go along. I'll be asking you questions and you can ask me questions, and I'll have a full-on Q&A at the end of the webinar, and I'll stick around and answer your questions. So just a little test as a test to see who's here and that you know where to find everything. Down on the bottom of your control panel, you should see what's called the GoToWebinar control panel. There's little windows you can open up. There's one called chat or questions. Open that up and just type in your name and where you're from for us so that we know that you're here and that the chat is working. Go ahead and type those in now and tell me, Rob, when you see some stuff coming in. We've got a few people on the line. I'll just put it in here. Rob, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, awesome. So for those of you, Rob is here. Awesome. So are we getting people telling us where they're from?
Absolutely. We've got people from Southern California, North Carolina, Houston, Texas, Corpus Christi. Hey, Corpus Christi. We lived there for 6 weeks.
Spent some time there, yeah.
Connecticut, Iowa, Missouri.
Cool. Okay, so that's working. Something else that you'll see right beside, there's sort of a little tab on the side of your panel with different things on it. One of them is a little hand. It looks like a little hand. And what that is it just raises your hand. Sometimes during webinars, people will ask you just sort of a, show of hands, who has ever done that sort of thing, just to get a quick survey. So if you want to click the hand now, what it does is it just raises your hand and it gives me an idea of who's here, who's paying attention, and who can find the hand button. So good. Okay, people are finding that. Awesome. So where you typed where you're from is where you will type the questions. There's also a chat at the bottom. Rob will be giving links to things that I mentioned during the webinar. So if I mention a link, he will put it in there and you can just directly click on it. If you miss anything during the webinar, whether it be something that I've said or a link, not to worry, you will get an email with the recorded version tomorrow, including all of the links. Okay, so those will be sent to you by email tomorrow. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to get started with the actual webinar. So getting to some wow. So first thing, a little bit about myself. My name is Darlene. I've been a professional photographer for approximately 25 years. I hate to date myself a little bit, but I'm formally trained, originally going to college for a 2-year photography program, and I've been doing photography ever since in, excuse me, various different capacities, including commercial photography, portraits, weddings. I currently do some fine art work and sell my artwork through a gallery locally. And for the last 2 years, I've been doing teaching. So I teach classes locally, and I really, really enjoy that. I love sharing my passion for photography with others who are just beginning in the craft or have been partway down their journey and seeing the world open up and seeing their photography absolutely blossom. So that's where my passion lies now, is in teaching. And this webinars is something new that I'm going to be branching out into, more digital teaching, digital coaching, to reach more people in various different places like yourselves. So that's me. If you're not familiar with my website, it's herviewphotography.com. You can sign up there for my free ebook with some additional challenges besides the ones I'm going to give you tonight. And when you sign up, you'll also get notices of new articles and travel tours and things like that. Okay. So tonight we're going to talk about 3 things specifically on how to get more wow in your images. I just start with this one because I just think she's adorable. This is Mama Sentosa. She was the oldest lady in the Sacred Valley when she passed away at about age 92. Okay, so 3 factors to wow in your photography. We're going to talk about tonight watching your background, right? Simplifying, how to simplify your picture and what that means. and how to differentiate. We'll talk about a few different ways for you to be able to do that. Okay? So the first one is watching the background. Okay, so what is behind your subject? So the subject being the thing that you're photographing, your object, if it were. Okay, the thing behind, or what is behind, is just as important, sometimes more important than the subject itself. And I'll show you a couple of examples. Okay, so this first one here, this is a little tree that I found in Hawaii that I thought had some interesting, little flower buds on it. However, the problem with this picture, it's not a wow, and the reason that's not a wow is because the background is so distracting. The background takes your eye and your attention away from the subject, which is those leaves and flowers in the front. Okay? If you've never done this before, something that I suggest to my students in my classes is to look at your photographs upside down. Okay, this one kind of looks okay either way, but if you look at your pictures upside down, it takes away sort of the reality aspect of what it is, and now you're just looking at the elements of the image for what they are in terms of shapes and colors and brightness ranges. And the first thing that you'll notice when we look at this upside down is that those bright areas in the background grab your attention. Okay, so that is one of the things we're going to look at. So now that we know what not to do, okay, let's look at the alternative. So here I've done another image of the same tree, and it looks completely different. Okay, so the background has now changed. And we're going to talk about how to go from this to this. Okay, so if you're at a place where maybe you've been doing photography for a while and you post your images online, but you're not getting the response that you want from people, or maybe you get a wow every now and then, but you'd like to get a few more of them, this is our goal. We want to have you getting more wows. Right? So in regards to the background, there are 4 things that grab your attention. I already mentioned one of them. So if you were listening, you got one already. Okay, so the first one is brightness. Those areas of bright sunlight in the background take your attention. Okay. Bright colors. Okay, so color, but specifically bright colors, and specifically warm colors. So things like yellow, orange, red, even pink to some degree. They project. Okay, so what they call warm colors project, cool colors recede, meaning that they seem like they pop out of the picture when they're warm, bright colors. Okay, so if they're in the background, you don't want that happening. You don't want your background popping out. You want your subject popping out. Okay. Contrast. Okay, so the human eye is drawn to areas of contrast. So contrast being a dark area of the picture against a light area. Especially when you have something that's in the bright sun, you're always going to have a lot of contrast because you'll have the highlight of the sunlit area and the shadow area. Right? Sharpness. Right? We're going to take a look at each of these a little bit more detail, but sharpness is obviously where you're focused. So if you have your entire picture in focus, your eye has a harder time knowing where you want it to look. So you know where you want the viewer of your picture to look because you were there and you took it. But when you show somebody a scene that they weren't part of originally, they have to be led through the elements of design and the elements that we're talking about here to your subject. Okay. So how can we control these things? Okay, so we looked at of the things we don't want in the background. There are ways we can control them through lens selection, number 1. The angle of view that you choose. Now, the angle of view can be related to lens selection, but I'm talking more specifically where you physically stand your body. Okay, where are your feet? And your camera settings. Okay, lens selection. So this is what I mean by lens selection will change your background. So take a look at the picture on the left of the little girl. Okay, keep in mind that these pictures were done. She is sitting in exactly the same spot. So she is the same distance away from that house in the background in both pictures, right? Doesn't look the same, okay? And that is because of the lens selection. So the wide lens that used on the left image includes a lot, okay? It shows a lot of the scene. It also seems to be a lot more in focus, okay? So you would think that I used a smaller aperture on that one. Again, I didn't. These are both shot at f5.6. Okay, so when you use a longer lens, so the one on the right is now a 200mm lens, it does something called compression. Excuse me. It compresses your image so that the background seems like it's right up against her, but it's showing only a very small part of it, okay? And it's very out of focus because it's far away from her. right? So imagine, if you will, I did this exercise with the folks last week, so I'm curious to see if anybody actually did this. You can play along with me if you like. If you have a horse with blinders on, okay, so if you've ever seen a horse, or maybe you own a horse, and you put the blinders on, the blinders are to guide the horse to look straight ahead. So when the blinders are off or they're wide open, imagine you're looking at your subject with the blinders wide open. That's what you see with a wide angle lens. You're going to see all the way out to the peripheral vision, out to your side. When you close the blinders, like you would on the horse, you see only straight ahead and only a very small portion of the scene that's in behind the subject. Okay, so if you want to sort of replicate that with your hands, just close your hands forward until you're almost doing tunnel vision, looking straight ahead, and you see just a very small portion of the background. Okay, so the numbers that I put down below there, I used a 17mm lens. If you want the same type of look on a cropped sensor camera, you'd be using a 12. Okay? On the picture on the right, I used 200mm on a crop sensor. If you were using a 135, you would have a similar look on your camera. And the second point was the angle of view. So in the image on the left, notice the background. Notice that there is a lot going on there. So do you remember our elements of what we want to avoid in the background are bright areas? We have that. Bright colors, we have that. And contrast, we have that. Right? We also have a fair bit of sharpness. It's not completely sharp, but it's not completely blurred out either. Okay, so there's a lot going on there, and your eye, as a viewer, doesn't know where to look. There's a lot going on in the whole picture for you to pick the subject out. Okay. Let's look at the picture on the right. Okay, so just by physically walking around the fountain, now I have a completely different background. Okay, this would be a better choice. I don't think it's the best choice because the building is still very bright, right? But it simplifies it a lot. So we've eliminated a lot of the problems with the first one just by moving around to the other side. Okay, maybe we can do a little better. So if we continue and we apply both principles, we work around the subject and we change possibly our angle of view with our lens as well, now we come up with something completely different. So in this more close-up of the fountain, you get some details. You see that it's a fountain. The background is basically not an issue. You don't even know it's there, okay? So the background should be complementary to your subject, and it shouldn't draw attention, because if it's competing, your eye's going to go back and forth between the subject and the background. Okay? Okay, so the last thing we can do to control our background is our camera settings, specifically using the aperture. So I mentioned earlier using a small using a small aperture like f22. Okay, so f22 is a very tiny opening, gives you a lot of depth of field. So in this picture, as an example, we see everything from the tree that's in the foreground all the way to the yard, the deck, and even the motorhome and the other tree in the background are relatively sharp. You can still make out what they are. Okay. Landscape photographers will often use such settings in small apertures because they want a lot of depth of field, but they very carefully use the other elements to make sure that the viewer's eye goes where they want it to. Okay? So I'm just going to run through a little exercise here where I'm going to change the aperture, opening the aperture to larger and larger and larger as we go. Okay, so we're going to change to f16. Now take careful notice as I change each picture what's happening to the background. Okay, as I go down to f5.6, we're starting to see a lot of blur. Okay, f4, a lot of blur in the background, 2.8, and finally 1.8. So at 1.8, we have the front tree in focus, and pretty much everything else is almost undistinguishable. Okay, it's so out of focus that we don't even know what it is. It's become just a mass and blur of color. Okay, some people refer to that as a bokeh. Okay, you're out of focus circles of light. Okay, so this is often a desirable thing when you want a background that's distracting to disappear. Okay, if you're thinking, okay, I don't have a lens that has 1.8, a very easy way to invest in such a thing is to go out and get yourself what I call the Nifty 50. It's commonly called the Nifty 50 50mm 1.8 lens. They make it for most camera brands. The Canon one that I have, I think it's about $125. The Nikon one is slightly less than $200. Make sure you get the Nikon one that has autofocus though. And I'm sure that Pentax, Olympus, Sony also have similar versions of this lens. Okay. It's a fairly small lens. It's very inexpensive. It's lightweight. You can throw it in your bag. And what it does is it's a prime lens, so it's fixed. It does not zoom. And it also forces you to be a little bit more creative. We'll talk about that a bit later. But it allows you to have a lens in your bag that works really well for this type of shallow depth of field. And when you get into a low light situation and you run out of light, your other lenses just can't work. So let's compare the two. Image on the left, we have lots of depth of field, f22. Image on the right, less depth of field. Take notice particularly of the background between the two images. Okay, big difference. And all I've done there is control the aperture setting in my camera. Okay? Typically, I'm shooting an aperture priority. That's my mode of choice because I do like these narrow depth of field look. So that's often the settings that I am using. Okay, so we've come to the end of one section. We're going to do something else called a poll. So coming up on the screen, you will see a poll. Just fill in the answer for yourself. And if you have a question about this last section, please type it in so Rob can read me one of the questions. So go ahead and answer the poll now. Rob, do we have a question about that section?
We only have a request so far. Nobody has any questions yet. The request is to incorporate tips for mirrorless micro four thirds systems as well as crop sensors cameras.
Okay.
And she's asking very politely.
It's kind of, I mean, it is kind of a question. All of this applies to any camera. And I'm actually considering jumping ship almost full bore into mirrorless cameras because of the size factor. Carrying an SLR around, the world if you're traveling is cumbersome. So everything that I'm going to talk about applies across the board. It applies to any type of camera, really. Okay? So if something comes up that you feel doesn't apply or you have an extra question, please ask it again. Okay, so I think everybody is answered. We're going to close that. And just for curiosity's sake, if everybody would like to see where everybody else is on the webinar, and we'll carry on to the second point. Okay, so the second one is simplicity. Okay, so back to talking about our wow in photography. So how do we get more wow by simplifying? Okay, so I like to believe in the KISS principle and less is more. Right? So I'm going to show you a series of images I took in a cemetery in Savannah, Georgia. So the cemetery is very well decorated. It's almost park-like. So there's lots of beautiful flowers. And this is the section where the veterans, so the war veterans, are all buried. And the tombstones are all the same. So I was struck by the uniformity and the rows of the tombstones that were all the same. And if you look closely, you'll notice one that has a little rock on top of it. So whether a child placed it there or a bird, I don't know, but it caught my attention. Anyway, so this was the first shot I took. Okay. Something that you're going to see through this series and through the next series as well is that often photography, I talk about photography is the journey, not a destination. So my students will say, I would like to go from, taking 1,000 images and only having 10% good ones and 90% that go in the trash to opposite. I'd like to be able to have 90% of the pictures I take as awesome and 10% trash. And the reality is that most photographers, even professionals, are probably closer to the other direction, 10% keepers, right? Even though they're professionals. The reason being is that photography is about evolution, so evolving your shot. You won't take the best picture the first time out, right? So let's take a look at how this scene evolves, right? So I took this initially with my 80mm lens. Physically look at how many tombstones are in this picture. Okay, if you can count fast, count them real fast, because the next one is not going to have as many. So simplifying means physically having less in your picture. Okay, so the next one I've zoomed in a little bit to focus on that tombstone with the rock on the top, and I actually have less tombstones now. So it's that blinders closing down thing. I have less in my angle of view with my lens. Okay. I may have physically walked a little bit closer to it as well. What else do you see happening in this picture that maybe isn't so desirable? Right? Look at the background. Bright colors, right? So the bright colors could be something I handle in post-production. I could tone them down or desaturate them, or I could keep working the scene a little bit more. So let's continue. Okay, so I've zoomed in even further. Okay, so now I'm using a 200mm lens at f2.8, which is not an inexpensive lens, and not everybody's going to have that option. Okay, I've also focused on the second row of tombstones instead of the front row. So what happens now is you're looking through the front row into the middle row. Still have the problem of the pink flowers in the background, but we're getting a lot simpler. We're getting right into the meat of the subject matter. Now this is my final shot of the series. I think I took about eight pictures in the series to get to this one, and the question mark is there because is it the best? Right? What I was attracted to in this final image was the little white flowers and the flag at the bottom of the tombstone. Right? So for me, it was fairly symbolic. The flag and the flowers, the new growth, with the tombstone, which represents the death, and the military. So it drew me in to get closer, closer, closer until I was really simplified and to the one tombstone. Is it the best of the series? Again, that's debatable because everything in photography is subjective, right? I may like a different picture than you like, and that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I tend to go through a progression of series like this because then when you get back, you have choice, right? And that's what most photographers do, right? It's about having that choice of, okay, which one really did work? And sometimes you cannot tell until you get back and look at it on your computer. When you're looking at it full screen, you see it with all of its glory, then you're going to know, yes, that one really works. Okay, so don't be afraid to shoot some more. Okay, so we're going to look at one more series where we can simplify. So this is from a recent trip that we did, my husband and I, to Oregon. And Oregon is known for waterfalls and streams. And so we went to this one just outside Portland. This was my first shot. So arrived there, plunked down my tripod. Right? You can tell I'm using a tripod because if you're familiar with waterfalls, the beautiful misty look of the water is done with a really long exposure. So this is about a 3-second exposure. Okay? So I wasn't really happy with that because I didn't like the leaves sort of covering over the stream, and I wasn't really saying what I wanted to say. Okay? So I took another. Now I physically moved myself closer to the stream. Okay, so I had to climb over some rocks and around a tree, and I probably have one of my tripod legs in the stream at this point. And what it's done is it's opened up that I can see the waterfall in the back. So in the top left corner of the image, you actually see the waterfall, whereas before you didn't. So I think this is a great improvement over the first one. I still thought I could do better, so I continued working the scene. This is the next one I did. I liked the contrast. What I was looking at here was the water flowing over the rocks. So the contrast of the texture of the rocks with the water flowing smoothly over, and I wanted to sort of capture that, and it really wasn't working for me, so I didn't stay much on this image at all. Okay, the fourth image, now I'm starting to, again, get closer into the scene. I'm including less. Okay, so remember, less is more. So now I'm really getting down to that, okay, we've got the texture of the rocks and the water, which is a little closer to what I was looking for. Okay. This shot, now we're really getting somewhere. We eliminated the outside foliage, and we're just down to the rocks and the water. And now by doing this, notice how I talked about simplifying, getting closer to your subject is something that I talk about a lot, is look at that little leaf on the rock there. I didn't put it there. It's not beyond me to do so, but I didn't put it there. I noticed it because I got closer and closer and closer. If I was still doing the wide angle shot, I wouldn't have seen that little leaf. So I saw this and I took the shot, and then I decided that it had merit. I just wasn't quite happy with the composition. Okay, so composition flows left to right. I don't know if the camera's going this way. Composition flows left to right because that's how our eye tends to read, right? Top to bottom, left to right. And I felt like the rock was sort of making me stuck there. I wanted the water to flow out of the picture a little bit more. So I recomposed as this angle of view, and you see the water flowing down a little bit down the rocks, and I was quite happy with that. So this is my final shot. So it's gone a long ways from the first one where I just plunked down and I saw the whole stream to this one where I got in really tight. Again, neither is right or wrong. None is better overall. This is my favorite. You may have liked the first or the second one better, and that's totally fine. Just keep in mind that as you go into a subject where you have a scene like this, any scene really, you need to sort of have it develop and allow yourself to develop the scene and photograph various aspects of it. One of those things is getting closer and getting in to simplify. Okay, so I mentioned getting in close, include less. to say more. Okay, so for me, the final image says more in terms of a message of the contrast of the rocks and the texture of the moss and the smooth water than the first one does, because there's so much going on, it's a bit confusing. Okay, so a simplification of message in your image. Okay, the KISS principle is always a good thing to follow in any situation, photography or life in general, right? So keep it simple. Limit the viewer's options, meaning when you have a lot in the picture, like the first scene, and there's trees and leaves and the tombstones and the other one, there's a lot to look at and a lot to the eye to check out, where there's physically less elements in it and you have limited the viewer's options by simplifying down right to the subject. They have less choice but to look right at the subject, and you're guiding them, right? So just like a writer will guide you with their writing and how they use the words, the photographer is the same. Okay, so you need to guide your viewer. Okay, so end of our second section. I'm going to launch another poll here for you. So this just will give me an idea of where you're at in terms of photography. What types of things would you like to know next? What would you like to learn? This will help me plan future webinars and topics for workshops and subjects for future classes. So I'd love to know what you would like to learn next. Please answer the poll. And do we have any questions, Rob?
There are no questions, Darlene.
We have a quiet audience today. Last week we had over 100 people and we couldn't even fit everybody in. So we might have a shorter evening tonight.
And I had to sort through all the questions, so my job's easy today.
Okay, another couple seconds to answer the poll. And I'm going to end that one. Okay, so it looks like this group wants artistic things. So you're on the right webinar then, because mostly what we're talking about today is absolutely the artistic stuff. Okay, so we're going to get into the third section, which is dare to be different or differentiate. Okay, daring to be different. So in photography, you can do that by a number of different ways. So if you go to a place, let's say you're traveling, and you're going to go to Paris, and of course you're going to photograph the Eiffel Tower. So how do you come up with a picture of the Eiffel Tower that hasn't been done before? It's like the old thing, okay, every song, has already been written. But that's not the case because they continue to write new songs. So there are ways to be different. You just have to apply your own experience and your own sense of humor even sometimes to a situation to come up with what is different for you. Okay? So you can do that by changing your lens, changing the angle of view, changing the lighting if you have control over such things, and adding some movement. So again, we're looking at the camera settings part of that. Okay, so a lot of these are the same types of things we heard in controlling the background. Okay, starting to make a little bit of sense. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of different subjects photographed two different ways. So here we have a game farm, typical subjects, the deer. Okay, they provided pellets for us to feed the deer, so of course they come running and they get nice and close and we get a nice cute shot. We've got some great lighting, the deer is anxious, I've got his eyes, and he's looking at me anticipating his kibbles coming soon, but it's a fairly straightforward picture. We're looking straight at the deer. Okay, so how can we do this differently? Keeping in mind the things that I just mentioned, okay? So this one I chose to do differently by angle of view and by my lens selection. So I've chosen a really wide lens here. This is my 17mm lens on a full frame camera. For those of you using a crop sensor, that's going to be about a 12. If you're using a mirrorless, it's going to depend on the size of your sensor and what system you're using. It could be a 12 or it could be an 8. Okay? Hope that helps that one. And I've also chosen to take a higher camera angle, so I'm looking down at them, okay? So it gives a bit of a comical appearance. Their heads are really big, so when you're dealing with a wide-angle lens, it enhances perspective, which means that anything that's close to the lens looks bigger than it is, okay? So imagine, you're driving a big truck and you have those little side mirrors or an RV that says objects in the mirror are closer than they appear. Okay, same thing applies here with a wide lens. So when the deer or when the subject gets really close, it gets enlarged to the point of sort of cartoon-like. Okay, and so that added an element of a bit of humor to the deer in this picture. Okay, another typical subject. Okay, everybody goes to festivals, I'm assuming. This is an outdoor festival in Edmonton where we live, and they were doing the tango. I was a volunteer photographing the Latin festival, and I wanted to capture the dancers in a traditional way and get the pictures that the festival will be able to use on posters and things like that. And I also wanted to do it a little bit differently. So there's that difference again. Um, Not knowing much about the tango, I know that it's all about the footwork. That's basically all I know. I've watched the tango, and I know that they have some very intricate, detailed footwork. So when I took my second picture, I tried to approach it from that aspect of conveying the importance of the footwork. Okay? So again, I chose lens selection, and I've got a longer lens now, so I'm only seeing part of their bodies. I didn't feel that I needed to see their faces to convey the footwork message. Okay, so I simplified down. My background is bright, however, there's not a lot of contrast or color in it. Okay, so I've done some of that in post-processing to eliminate the distracting background, but I've focused right in on the subject in a different way than the average person will do. Okay, so part of getting some wow or getting wow responses to your photographs is doing it in a different way than the average person would do. Okay, the average person stands at eye level, they don't go down low and crawl around on the ground. They don't climb up on a ladder and look down on things. So anytime you do something that's different than the average person or the average tourist, you're going to get some wows, right? So next time you're photographing something, just think about that, okay? How would the average tourist do this? How can I do it differently? Okay, so here is not a typical average tourist picture. Okay, this is New Orleans, and this fellow comes with an interesting story. I was chatting with him. We were in New Orleans in 2010, so after the hurricane, and I was there before the hurricane, and I was just chatting with some of the locals to find out what is it like to live there now, and is the city coming back to life again? So this fellow was quite interesting. A lady walks by, and the horse nudged her on the bottom with his nose. And so the guy who owns this horse, he went up to the horse and he was shaking his finger, naughty, naughty, naughty horsey, bad, bad girl. And finally he turned to her and he gave her his cheek and he said, give me a kiss. And this is what the horse did. So a lot of what I talk about in my classes, in particular if you're doing events, even if you're doing travel photography like this, photography is a lot about being in the right place at the right time, which I clearly was, having the right lens on, right, and knowing how to capture the scene, okay? So I was ready to capture this because I had my camera ready. I saw the scene unfolding and I used the wide lens to give it that comedy again, okay? Okay, a pretty standard landscape. So this is typical Alberta landscape. If you live on a prairie, you may have something similar to this. So how do we do it differently? There's nothing wrong with this picture. It's well exposed. It's got some nice colors, some nice clouds. But to me, it's just kind of a little bit static and a little bit uninteresting. Okay? So I composed the picture a little bit differently. So I still wanted to focus on the grain elevator, which is a dying breed in our area. There's not very many of them left. But I framed it through the element of the barbed wire fence. Right? The other thing that I did is I tilted the camera. So you notice the horizon looks like it's tilting, right? And that's done on purpose. I have a general rule of thumb that if you have tilted your camera, say 5 to 10 degrees, it's going to look crooked, and it probably is crooked, and you should straighten it. If it's tilted 30 to 45 degrees, you've done it on purpose. So if you are going to tilt, do it enough so that it makes it obvious that it's tilted, right? I'm going to go back to the previous one. The difference between straight lines and diagonal lines also is it adds a little bit of dynamic feel to the image. So straight lines, especially horizontal ones, are static, they're calming. So this has a very peaceful feeling, this image. Okay? The diagonal lines are more dynamic. This one feels like it has more movement. So even though there's nothing moving, the dynamic diagonal lines make it feel like it is. Okay? Lastly, I did another shot just to capture the texture and the difference in the texture from the grain elevator to the white fluffy clouds and the blue sky. So there was a color contrast and a texture contrast that I liked, and so I got in really close to do that. Okay? So again, I've done a series of images. All are decent, all are nice. Maybe one wows you more than another, but if I don't go through that series of progressions, I don't get to this one. Okay? And maybe this is your favorite. Okay? So try different things. Okay, this one we're going to look at the lighting. So this is a fellow who's a character actor in a western town in Arizona, and he plays a gunfighter. So they play out these afternoon gunfights, and the light on his face was quite lovely. He didn't know I was taking his photo. You know, it's a nice profile. The light on him is very contrasty, and so he really shows up as a subject, and he looks very grizzled, and which is appropriate for his character, right? Now, knowing what I know about light as a photographer, and this just takes practice, okay? So if you learn to know where the light is coming from, take a look at this picture. So the light is coming from in front of him. So the direction that he's looking, that's where the light is. So what I did was I walked around behind him, okay? Because he was standing on a wooden boardwalk, I anticipated what was going to happen when I went behind him, and I got this picture. Okay, so I changed my lens to a wider lens to capture the shadow of him this time, and I changed my angle of view, knowing that when I walked around, I was going to get his shadow. Okay, I did a little bit in post-processing on this one to increase the contrast because I wanted less detail. I wanted more of a true silhouette, which is just black and white. Okay? So learning to see light is something that takes practice. Okay? If that's not something that you're currently doing, just make note of light wherever you are. You don't have to have your camera with you. You know, notice where the shadows are falling. So if the shadows are falling to the right, you can bet that the light source is coming from the left. So start to look for light direction and this type of thing. So one last example, if you've ever been to Asia, you'll know that there's a lot of scooters. This is in Malaysia. So scooters are a very popular thing. They'll weave through the traffic to get to the front. So when the light turns green, off they all go at the same time. So I wanted to capture that, but I just didn't feel like this was really doing it. It didn't have any motion. It didn't have any motion or emotion, right? So I tried something a little bit different and I added some motion, right? So how I did this was using a technique called panning. Now, this one is not perfect, and I could probably do better if I practiced several times. Panning does take a lot of trial and error. Okay? The short version of how you do panning is you set your shutter speed on something around a 30th of a second, maybe faster, maybe slower, depending on the subject, and then you follow it. So with this motorbike, it was coming from my left to my right. You follow it with the camera, just like you would if you were swinging a bat, like playing baseball or golfing. Okay, so you follow it with the camera and you take the pictures of them as it hits the middle. And what happens is, because you're moving the camera, the background is going to be blurred using the slow shutter speed. If you match the speed of the moving object and get it just right, they will be reasonably sharp. Okay? Like I said, it takes a little bit of practice. Sometimes you have to play with just the right shutter speed. 30th might be too slow, might be too fast. Maybe you need to physically move yourself a little faster. But it is quite easy to get really nice shots. And this works really well if you have a background that's really, really ugly. Okay, so if you can't get rid of it using the other techniques that we talked about, you can get rid of your background by panning if you have a moving object. Right? So I have an article on my website on using shutter speed effectively and panning, and I talk about how to do this in a little more detail. Okay, so we are at the end of a section, and I'm going to ask another question. So I think I know the answer to this one. I think most people found this through my newsletter, but if you could just let me know how you found out about this webinar, that would be great. Helps us to know if our advertising and our marketing is working. Yes, most of you have found us through the newsletter. Do we have any questions about the last one, differentiate, Rob?
I'm going to say no, but I have a question here.
Okay.
Okay, questions now are coming in. Can you define wide-angle lens and super wide lens?
Aha. Okay, so generally, I'll work backwards from normal. So a normal, quote, normal lens would be what the human eye sees. So on a full frame camera, that would be a 50 mil lens. Okay, so I'm just going to give references to full frame. If you have a crop sensor, you kind of need to divide that by 1.5. So anytime I mention 50, crop sensor, that's going to be about a 35. Okay, so you kind of have to do some math. So normal is 50. Wide, sorry. So normal is 50 because that's roughly what your human eye sees. Okay, and it's kind of been that way since photography started. They call it a normal lens. A wide lens is something that's in a mid-range wide. So I would consider wide, say 24 to 50. Okay. A super wide is going to be something that starts distorting on the edges. So a 15 up into a 20-ish, 24 range. Okay, so I use my 17 a lot. That would be considered a super wide. 15 would be considered a super wide. So on a crop sensor, super wide is going to be your 10 to 24 lens. Okay. On a mirrorless camera that has a 2x conversion, it's going to be, say, an 8 to 15. Does that answer the question?
And I've got one more question here. I think we have time for one more, right?
Sure.
Question is from Makita. Wants to know, do you do these series all the time, even when doing a pro shoot, or only when shooting for yourself?
That is a really good question. Give them kudos, whoever asked that question. All the time. All the time. When I'm doing a pro shoot, say, for example, I'm doing a family session, I will, in discussion with the family, and it's typically the mom because she's the one arranging it, I will have a discussion about what are her expectations and what she wants to get out of the family picture, you know, in terms of style and background and that type of thing. And I will do exactly what they want. Okay, so I will meet their expectations. And I usually tell them that, you know, I'm going to do 80% of the session for them, and I'm going to do 20% of the session for me. And so then the 20% for me, I'll do something different. So that's where I get to do that differentiate part. I'll try something that she maybe wouldn't have thought of. So she might not have asked for a particular thing because she doesn't know it's possible. So I'm going to do that different piece. And I'm going to say that 8 or 9 times out of 10, those are the pictures that my clients end up picking. So very good question. In the commercial world, it's a little different, and it depends on if you're doing commercial photography and working with an ad agency or an art director. Often those shoots are stricted and scripted to the letter, and you do exactly what they say, and there's not a lot of creativity that the photographer puts out. So one of the reasons that I switched from doing commercial photography to portrait and wedding was I had more flexibility to express my own style, and again moved away from doing that into fine art because now I get to do whatever I want. So I'm going to do one more poll because I missed this one while everybody's still chatting. Is there any more questions? And we'll go on to the next thing. So just give me an idea of who's using what for cameras. I know we have at least a couple of mirrorless people on this one, and that's getting more and more popular. Like I said, I'm moving that direction myself. Don't think I will get rid of my SLR completely. There's lots of debate on that. You know, people going full on mirrorless. If I wasn't doing commercial jobs and paid jobs, I probably would jump ship, to be honest, and go completely mirrorless. Sony NEX makes a great line. The Olympus OMD makes a great line. Panasonic Lumix, all really good choices.
I do have a question if you got time.
Okay.
What would be a good walking around lens? How did you know to have that particular lens on for the horse kissing the man shot?
Good question. Luck. So that's the other piece of photography, is being in the right place at the right time with the right lens on and being lucky. You know, the guy with the shadow where I anticipated the cowboy, that was mine. That was my skill. I knew that the light was going to be there, and I chose to change lenses, and I had the time to do that. Right? You don't always have time in the case of the horse shot. So I honestly got lucky. I happened to have my wide on when that happened, and it was the perfect lens for the shot. But my wide is a zoom, so it goes from 17 to 35. So I still had the ability to choose how wide I made it, and I made it as full wide as I could. Now keep in mind that if you've used a really wide lens like that, you'll understand how close I am to that guy. So the wider your lens, in order to fill the frame with your subject, I am probably about less than a foot away from his face taking that picture. All right. Does that answer that question? So I'm just going to do a little summary. So this is what we're going to continue with the rest of the webinar. We're going to summarize what we've learned today. I'm going to give you some practice exercises. So if you'd like to go and try some of these things on your own, and where do we go from here if you want additional learning? Okay, and then I'm going to stay on the line. We'll stay on the line up to an extra half an hour if need be to answer your questions if you have any, and make sure that we get as many answered as possible. Okay? So what have we learned today? So we learned to look at the background, and that is as important, if not more so, than the subject. Okay, so start learning to, when you look at your pictures on the back and do what we call chimping, which is image review, look at the background as well as the foreground, okay, or your subject, and look at it upside down. Okay, so get in that habit. You can turn your camera upside down, or you can look at it upside down on the computer. Okay? Don't turn your monitor upside down though. Please rotate it. Okay? Include less in the image to simplify. Okay, so more is less, and I'm not even going to say more than that because let's just keep it simple right there. Okay? How can you make things different? So taking the normal and figuring out how to make it not normal. One of the things that I hear a lot at the art shows that I've done, and I display my work in large canvases and things, is they will often assume that my work is paintings, and when they find out that it's photography, they'll say, but you take ordinary, boring things and you make them look interesting. Okay, so think of that as your goal, to take a boring, ordinary thing and make it different. Okay? Having said that, we're going to lead you into the practice exercises. So if Rob, you can type that into the chat room. Again, this will be in the email that you will get tomorrow, so if you miss it, not to worry, you will get the email. Okay? And then this will be a PDF that you can download and print off of the practice exercises that you can go do on your own. Okay, so number one, there's 3 of them to follow along with the 3 things that we learned today. So number 1 is going to be for your background. So find a subject, something that you can get all the way around, that you can move all around in 4 directions. Okay? Could be an old car parked on the street, could be a fire hydrant, could be your dog, right? Whatever. Take 4 pictures, okay? So put on a lens, maybe a medium lens, maybe a normal, and take one from every direction. So north, south, east, west, what have you, okay? Take one from all directions. Then change your lenses to a longer lens. Okay, so longer telephoto being 85, 100, 200, okay? If you have a really long one, you may have to back up a little bit because you may be too close to the object to focus on it, and do the same thing again. Take the same pictures from all 4 sides, okay? Review your images on the computer afterwards, making note of how different each 4 are, or each 8 of those practices are. Okay, next link for you to share in their chat, Rob, is the share link. So there's a private Flickr group that I've created for you to share your images. If you're not a Flickr member already, it's free to join. You just go to flickr.com. Maybe type that in as well, Rob. It's FLICKR, flickr.com. And you can create a free profile and share your images there. Okay. Exercise number 2 is going to follow the simplify rule. Okay, so you're going to find a subject and try and take several pictures of it, simplifying down right to the heart of the matter. So keep my examples in mind, if you have to, about getting closer, because simplification often goes hand in hand with physically getting closer and zooming in. Okay? I'll hear a lot from my students in my classes about their limitations in terms of what lens they own. Okay, so that may be the case. If you are limited in what lens you own and you don't have a really long lens, you own something that most people are going to have, I'm going to assume, and that's feet. Okay, so you can physically get closer. Okay? If you're in a wheelchair, you can wheel closer. Okay, so get closer and hear my voice in your head saying get closer, get closer, get closer. If you can still focus the lens, you're not close enough. If the lens won't focus anymore because you're too close, that's probably close enough. So once again, review and share on the Flickr group. If you're going to share, please make sure that you put some sort of comment in the image so I know which exercise it is in relation to. Okay. So then lastly, dare to be different. So now you're going to go find one of those boring subjects I talked about, whether it be an old shoe. Go find something in your garage that you think is ugly. It could be an old rag or a wrench or just something that you think is unattractive and generally people don't photograph. Right? Try and do something different with it, whether it be simplification, changing the background, changing the lens. Can you put it in different light? If it's an object that you can move around, take your old rusty, ugly looking wrench and put it in different lighting. Put it in the shade. What does it look like when you photograph it there? Put it in the sun. What does it look like there? Put it under different types of light. Put it in fluorescent. Put it under a spotlight. Okay, so try different things. Try the light coming from different angles. Okay? What can you do different? So photography and learning and how you will get better faster is all about in the doing. Okay, so there is no shortcut. The more that you do this kind of thing, the faster your photography will improve and you'll be happier with it. All right. So where do we go from here? Okay, so some additional learning is available, and what I'm doing is launching a brand new course. It's 4 weeks to better photography. So if you liked the information that we talked about tonight, it's going to be more of the same. We're going to be interactive. You're going to participate, similar to how you've done tonight with questions, but even more so. We'll have microphones, so you'll be able to speak and ask questions. You'll have potentially video if you want to go on video with me and show me your face. I'd love to see you. It'd be just like being in the classroom. And the class size will be limited to 24 plus myself and Rob, or my moderator, to help me with the questions. So everybody will get a chance to speak and ask their questions and have their images reviewed. Okay, so each week will be a 2-hour class. Partly it'll be a lesson like we just did, a 1-hour lesson, an image review, and then a period of question and answer. Okay, so 8 hours total, and each week you will get assignments just like we just went through. And the following week, we will be going through them and reviewing your images. Okay, so everybody will have at least one image reviewed. You'll get comments on how to improve. You'll get comments on things you did great. You'll get encouragement. And it's great to do in a group setting because it's wonderful to see everybody improving over the 4 weeks. It's very encouraging. Right? I'm all about the giving tips and techniques to move you forward. And it's not about looking at comparing one to the other because everybody's in a different place on their journey. Okay? Every class will be recorded just like this one. Okay, so if you have to leave early or you come late and you miss something or you miss 1 week, you'll be able to watch it the next day. Okay, a private Flickr group as well. Right, and so those are all the things that you will get with the 4-week class. It starts next Tuesday, the 10th. That is September the 10th at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. If you don't know where Mountain Standard Time is, there's a handy time zone thing. Rob, do you have a link to a time zone thing? They can convert that. It's the same time that we started today, right? So for the 4-week class, it's $199. And what I'm going to do is if anybody from this webinar wants to join it, you have a limited time to get a discount. Okay, so I'm going to give you a code to do so. You will have 2 days if you want to register for this class. So that puts it up to September the 5th at midnight Mountain Time using the code Serendipity, and you'll save $30 if you wish to join. Okay? To go and see more information on the class, Rob, you can type that into the chat room. It's purviewphotography.com/4 weeks, 4 with a numeral. Okay? This is my last point on this one, and we'll go right into Q&A. So if you use the code, you will get the discount. And because this is the first time I'm doing this, this is all very new to me as well, and I want to take your feedback and make the classes as good as possible. So if you wish to give me an additional feedback from the course, there'll be an extensive survey that I will send out. I'll give you an additional $30 off in form of a refund. Okay? There'll also be an option if you want private coaching with me, that will be available as well. Okay? So again, all this will be in the email tomorrow, so you don't have to write all this down or go and check it right now, because I want to answer as many questions as possible tonight. If you have any questions about the 4-week class, please let me know. Okay, so now we have pure Q&A here. Okay, so this is, I'll leave this on the screen on how you can find me in various different online forums. Rob, what kind of questions do we have? So this could be questions about anything, absolutely anything.
Judy wants to know if we're going to do the 4-week class at another time.
Most likely, yes. It will depend on sort of demand, which is why I asked questions about what types of things people want to do. And if people want more advanced classes, then the next one will probably be a bit more advanced. But most likely it will come around again at some point, yes.
That is the only question.
All right. Well, let's do this then. Here's a poll for everybody. What types of classes would you like to have? For those that are still around. So surely there must be some burning questions about exposure or focus, or what lens should I buy, or filters, or what kind of questions did we have last time? We had all kinds of stuff.
Software.
Yes, editing. Come on, you guys. You must have some burning questions. Free, pick my brain. Somebody's commented on them last week. Yeah, somebody commented last week and said we should have marketed this webinar as Pick My Brain.
Okay, for somebody interested in going into commercial magazine photography, what do you recommend as a good entry-level job or internship?
So say it again, commercial or magazine photography?
Yeah.
Tough market to break into right now, to be honest. I would definitely say internship is the way to go, especially the magazine route. Try and get work with a photographer that does that type of work that you want to do. Find out the ins and outs of that particular industry. I haven't done commercial in a really long time. I have some good friends that do quite a lot of it and for quite prominent businesses. And I would say go and find somebody like that that does the type of work that you aspire to do. You can learn so much working for somebody else. Even the funny part is, some of my early jobs in photography was not so great, and the fellow that I worked for was not so great. But I certainly learned what I didn't want to do and how I didn't want to run my business. So there's always a learning opportunity there. So definitely internship is the way to go. I've been asked many times about whether or not going to a formalized photography school is the way to go anymore. And to be honest, I'm not sure that it is. There's so much learning available. I mean, what we're doing right now, and there's so many people that provide classes and things that you don't need to go to, say, a 2-year program. I think that learning has accelerated as well. And there's so much to learn sort of in the real world outside of a school, a classroom setting, um, that it's just great to get out there and do it. So I hope that answered his question.
Lots of good
Okay.
questions coming in now too.
Awesome.
And if you could take that poll down and go back to your screen, that'd be great, Dar.
No, just show the
Um,
results.
oh yeah.
Night
Okay.
photography in HDR. Cool.
Here's a question from Kiri asking about free editing programs. Have you ever used any free editing programs?
Free, as in, give me an example, like a GIMP program or something like that?
Exactly like
Okay,
GIMP.
exactly like GIMP. I just had a discussion with a fellow on my website the other day in the comments on something. I have not used GIMP. Um, I've been a photographer for a long time, and I started using Photoshop probably on version 3. So not CS3, we're talking 3. Long time before I even shot. Yeah, it's not funny, Rob. um, Long time before I even shot digital images, I was scanning my film and doing some digital work that way because I did traditional retouching. So I've never really had the need to sort of take a step backwards. I do know some people that use GIMP and they do it quite well. I would say some alternatives to the really expensive. I mean, Photoshop is really expensive, and especially now you have to buy the membership in the cloud if you want to have Photoshop. The alternative that most photographers use and recommend, and what I recommend, is Lightroom. You can often get Lightroom on sale for about $125, and usually the upgrade, if you want to upgrade, each edition is about 75 bucks. So if you just price it out over, say, a year, I mean, you're talking 10 bucks a month, right? It's a couple of coffees a month. So cut your fancy lattes out or something. And, I would look at Lightroom. Okay, it has a 30-day trial, so you can try it out and have a look. There's lots of classes for it. It's far more the industry standard. I don't know enough about GIMP to comment. I think it's more along the lines of Photoshop. And the pieces that I love about Lightroom is the archiving and the labeling and the things that I can do with it that I can't even do with Photoshop. So 90% of what I do with my images is in Lightroom itself.
That was from Kiri, and the question from Jason is asking about fixed lenses or zoom for portrait.
Ah, for portrait, I'm going to say fixed. It's an interesting question because, again, dating myself, back in the days of film, my film cameras, I didn't have any zoom lenses. I used a medium format Hasselblad. It's in the closet over there if you want to see it. And I had 3 lenses. I had a wide, I had a normal, and I had a long. That was it. Then when I started doing 35 millimeter work, I had all primes and all fixed lenses as well. Zoom lenses have only become popular, I would say, in the last 10 years, particularly. The thing with zoom lenses is they're never going to be as sharp as a prime lens. Do I use them? Yes. I think we've become somewhat lazy with zoom lenses in some respects. When you're doing a portrait, you have the flexibility of being able to move back and forth. So where a zoom lens might be more applicable would be an event. Like if you want to be a wedding photographer, I'm going to say make sure you have a zoom lens because you don't always have the ability to move back and forth quickly enough to get the shot. If you want to be a newspaper photographer, probably you want a zoom lens as well. But if you're doing portraits, I would suggest pick up a couple of really good fixed lenses. The 50-1.8 is always a good choice. The 85-1.8, if you don't want to invest big money, is about a $600 lens for Canon. I'm sure that Nikon and other brands have a similar lens, or a 100 mm lens is another good choice.
Question from Judy, who is mirrorless. She's going on a European river cruise in a couple of weeks.
Ooh.
Wants to know some recommendations for lenses to take and to use in various settings, such as churches, landscapes, museums, or street shots.
Okay. The thing with traveling is it's always hard to know what to take. I teach a travel class, and we spend probably 2 hours talking about equipment. And there kind of is no right or wrong answer. So it depends on how much you want to carry, number one, how much you have. Do you want to bring your whole range with you, or do you want to simplify? Rob could tell his half of the story, but his version of the story is that when he's along, I bring everything and he gets to carry it. And when I'm going by myself, I pare my bag right down to almost nothing. So I would say it's going to depend on, like I said, how much you have. If you're mirrorless, you could probably fit 4 or 5 lenses in a bag and still weigh less than my camera with one lens. So you have some options open to you that the bigger SLRs don't have. I would say make sure you have a good zoom lens that has a good range, because you don't know what you're going to encounter. But still, back to those primes again, make sure you have at least one good prime. Often they'll call them a pancake lens. Can you ask her what actual camera she has so that I can comment on that as well? Um, just tell us what camera you have. And I would say make sure you get a prime that has a decent fast aperture. So fast being a large aperture, small numbers. So like f2.8, f1.8, something like that. Because that's going to give you performance in low light. So when you go into a cathedral or something that doesn't allow a tripod and it's dark, you're going to have that fixed lens with a nice big aperture to be able to use inside.
She is an OMD EM5.
Oh, beautiful camera. Well, first of all, I'm jealous that you're going on a river cruise and you have that camera, because that's what I would like to have. So if you don't already have one, I would definitely invest in one of their pancake lenses. Because you're Olympus, you can get any of the 4/3 range, so any of the Panasonic lenses, any of the Zeiss lenses, the Leica lenses. You've got a full catalog full of stuff you can choose from. If that doesn't answer your question, just fire me an email or a tweet or something, and I'll give you more information.
Okay, speaking of tripods, Lynn has a question. She says, many of your photos are not with a tripod. When shooting in aperture mode, how do you attain focus? Due to possibly low speed, do you have any tricks for getting sharp photos? Darlene uses a tripod all the time.
I do use a tripod a lot, but if we're just walking around a city, okay, like the New Orleans picture, for example, generally I'm in aperture mode. So two things about that: the large aperture lenses, right, that we've been talking about, f2.8, f1.8, do two things. They allow you to get that background out of focus because of the minimal depth of field that you have, but it also lets a lot of light in. So there's the scale. So when you have a large aperture, you can also get a faster shutter speed, coincidentally. So I think of it as a teeter-totter. So as your aperture closes down to 2, 2.8, 4, 5, 6, 8, your shutter speed gets slower and slower to compensate, because the teeter-totter is going the other way. Right? So having the larger aperture will allow you to use a faster shutter speed and eliminate some of that camera shake. Right? If you're still getting camera shake, the general rule of thumb that I recommend is to keep your shutter speed faster than your focal length of your lens. So if your focal length of your lens is, let's say you're using a 100 millimeter lens, make sure that your shutter speed is 1/100 or faster. Okay, and that will help eliminate that camera shake from your hands moving. If it's slower than that, then you need to either open your aperture if you can, or increase the ISO, because that will also allow you to use a faster shutter speed.
Okay, back to mirrorless. Massimo has a question about mirrorless. Wants to know what's better about it aside from the weight.
I think the convenience, the fact that it's opening up a realm of possibilities for people that are either slightly intimidated by SLRs, whether it be the size or the fact that SLRs are typically associated with more serious hobbyists or professionals. So it's opening it up to a lot more people that maybe wouldn't have gone that route. But the biggest advantage is the size. So let's take the size for a second in terms of weight. I mean, my camera is quite heavy. Like this camera with this lens probably weighs, I want to say, 6 pounds. Okay, whereas you could take a mirrorless camera that's going to weigh a third of that, if not less. Okay, so you can fill a bag with lenses and still weigh less than my whole camera. Travel becomes a lot easier. So the thing about traveling with an SLR, if you have a wide range of lenses and you want to bring them all along, it becomes a chore every day to carry them. How heavy is my bag, Rob?
That's very heavy.
He doesn't like my bag. My bag is very heavy because when I bring everything, I have a 70 to 200 f4, I have an 85, I have a 50, I have a wide, and I have my 24 at 105. So I potentially have 5 lenses in my bag that are all heavy, other than the 50. So going down to the mirrorless eliminates a lot of that weight factor. The other piece of that is that it opens up opportunities approaching people. So let's say you want to do street photography, right? If I put my 70 to 200 mil lens on and I stick that out in somebody's face, it does two things. Immediately, they form an impression of me. They think I'm a newspaper photographer or I'm shooting for a magazine or something, and they immediately think I'm going to be putting them on the internet, which I might, but I'm not a newspaper photographer, and they're intimidated. Okay. Oftentimes, they'll ask for money too because they assume that you're going to profit from taking their picture, so then they want to be compensated. Okay. When you're shooting with a mirrorless camera or even a point and shoot, that barrier disappears. You pull out a little OMD, it looks cute. It's not scary, it's not intimidating, and the person that is intimidated by my big lens isn't as much intimidated by that camera.
Would you also say that there's a less of a security risk with mirrorless than?
I would say so to some degree, yeah, because you're a target. If you travel to countries that are poor, for example, we're traveling to Cuba. I've been to Mexico, Peru, Thailand, Malaysia. Lots of places where there are lots of poor areas, and you definitely are a target. I know that my camera in my bag probably is more than they make in a year.
And mentioning all those countries, I'm just going to say the only time I've ever taken Darlene's camera from her was in New York.
Yes.
That's the only time I felt a problem based on somebody who was watching this.
And the only time I ever felt unsafe was actually in New Orleans, walking from the French Quarter back to my hotel, which was not in the French Quarter, and it's not recommended you do that.
Got a question here from Jatin Kumar, who does landscape and nightscape photography. He has I believe it's a he, has a Nikon D3100 right now, wants to upgrade to a better one, but not professional camera, like a D8 or a D6. Do you suggest any options?
Obviously I'm Canon, so I don't really know a lot about the newer models. I couldn't really advise you on that because I'm not really familiar with the models, but what I will do is give you a couple of sites to check out. Go to cameralabs.com. It's run by a New Zealand fellow, and he does camera reviews, and he just does them honestly. There's no money involved. He's not paid to do them, so they're absolutely unbiased. And the other website, I'll put this one in the chat for everybody, is dpreview.com. Okay, so that one is digitalphotographyreview.com, and you can do side-by-side comparisons of different models. You can see the review that they did on it. Again, unbiased, not paid to do. So I hope that helps.
And also for Jatin Kumar, someone's recommending you have a look at the D5100 and the D7000.
D7000 I know a little bit about, and that's a really good camera. I've had a lot of students with that, and it takes great images.
Okay.
I think just to answer the upgrade question, when somebody goes, like, I can speak to Canon because I'm familiar with their line, and Nikon is going to be similar, as well as Pentax. With the entry level cameras, the difference when you move up the tiers, what you will find is that they are more robust. So you will get things like a heavier duty body. Okay, so like my camera body is metal alloy covered in plastic, whereas a Canon Rebel is just plastic. There's nothing underneath the plastic. So if I if I bang mine on a fence or something, I'm not going to wreck it. Whereas, the lesser models are not so much. The higher end models are weather sealed, so things like dust and water won't get in. If you get a drop of water on, mine's not going to get water inside the camera. Right? So those are the different things. So you want to look at those features. Typically, the sensors, however, from the entry level to the mid grade are the same camera sensor. So where you're going to see the difference is in the physical body itself, how robust it is, like I said, and perhaps how many frames per second it shoots. And that's an issue if you're shooting moving subjects.
Okay, Cheyenne has a flash question. She uses a Nikon SLR and wants to know about purchasing a single external flash. Can you recommend an affordable solution?
Okay. Again, I don't know a lot about Nikon flashes, but anytime you want to buy a flash, the things you want to look for in a flash are, does it rotate and does it angle? Okay, so you're asking me to pull stuff out of my bag here. So I'll get you my flash here. Now they're not going to be able to see this on the video, but can you guys see my flash? So a normal flash looks like this, right? So make sure that you can tilt it and rotate it, okay? If your flash does that, that is sort of the minimum things that you want it to do. Everything else that it can do is secondary. Different levels of price points are how much power they have. Like for example, an SB 600, which is a Nikon flash, doesn't have as much power as an 800 or a 900. Okay, so there tend to be the power output. Okay, so it depends what you're shooting with it. You can also look at, say, off-market brands. Metz makes good flashes. They've made flashes for years and years, although they're not much less expensive. You can also look at a brand which is fairly popular right now. I don't know anybody that has the flashes, but I do know people that have the remote triggers, and that's Yongnuo. I'll just put that name in the chat there. So Yongnuo, I believe they're made in China, and you can get a similar flash for probably around $100 or $150 versus Canon or Nikon one for $5 to $6. So whether or not you want to give that a try and try the off-market ones, you're kind of taking your chances, or spend the big bucks and get the Nikon ones. I know the thing with the Nikon flashes is that they have a lot of stuff built in dedicated to your camera, so they do a lot of talking together, and in that respect the Nikon flash system is actually superior to the Canon flash system.
Okay, there's a question on software. Byron uses Aperture in place of Lightroom, but he's unsure of how much he should use Photoshop. Any recommendations on decision between using a Lightroom-like program versus Photoshop elements?
Okay. Yeah, I've seen Aperture a few times, and I've had a few students that have used it, and I've tried to assist them, and we haven't had much luck. If you like Aperture and you're getting results that are good, then I would say stick with it. I'll give you sort of my split on how much I do Photoshop and how much I do Lightroom. I would say 90% of what I do is Lightroom only. I shoot raw files, so I'm correcting, the brightness, exposure, clarity, contrast. I may add a vignette. I may do some adjustment brush things to darken or lighten certain areas only. I'm going to change the color if I want to adjust the color. I can do selective toning. I can make it black and white, all non-destructively. So anytime you're working inside of a program like Lightroom or Aperture, it's non-destructive. So you can always go back to the original without losing any information. Okay. If you're working in Photoshop, the things that I do in Photoshop are, if I have to combine two images, such as like a portrait head swap, something like that, or if I am blending two images together, if I'm making an HDR and I'm merging the sky back in. Very rarely, other times, do I go into Photoshop. If I want to add text, I will probably go into Photoshop, and that has to do with making images for my website and things. But normally, a photo just for a family photo shoot or a fine art image, probably 90 to 95% Lightroom.
And the last question is simply it's about mirrorless again. I guess it's just a clarification on something. With mirrorless cameras, you wouldn't use the same lenses used for DSLRs, would you?
No, they won't fit. The mirrorless cameras, there's sort of a couple of different lines. The Sony NEX has their own lenses, and they don't fit on any other cameras. Then there's also what's called the 4/3 cameras. And I don't know why that name. It's kind of a yucky name, but anything that's in a 4/3 line, and I mentioned earlier that the lady with the Olympus has a wide choice because she can choose from Panasonic lenses, Olympus lenses, Zeiss, Leica, anything that's in the 4/3 line will be interchangeable within each other.
And that was from Massimo. I think that's the last question, Dar.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining in. Like I said, if you have any additional questions, please, you can reply to the email that you will get tomorrow. And You can find me online at herviewphotography.com, and hopefully we'll see you again, maybe next week in the class. Have a great evening, everybody.